Hello and welcome to episode 332 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. What's going on, Ian?
It's the MRTT of podcast episodes. How you
we
doing,
got
Jason?
a little bit of everything? Or oh no, it's 332. Oh,
There it is.
I didn't even realize. Wow, I looked right past that. Man, that's not great. The more successful of the lesser version now of the A330, I guess, right? Maybe?
The more successful of the lesser version.
Yes, well, we have the
Yeah,
Neo
we'll
now.
go
No one cares about the CO. Wait, no, do I have that backwards? Did the A330 200 sell better than the 300? I might have that backwards. No, definitely not. I have that backwards, but I know enough to know that I was wrong.
It's okay. I think starting the podcast with you being wrong is a good way to dive in.
We'll get you at some point. Your turn.
Will get me at multiple points. I'm just here I'm just here for a good time.
Okay. Wow.
All right.
What a Wednesday.
It's Wednesday, August 13th. Summer is, well, I said last week summer was wrapping up, and you reminded me that summer was not wrapping up. Everyone is still on vacation. And while that may be true, I get to send my kids back to school next week. So I'm very excited about that. But before we do, we have to get through a slew of aviation news this week. And we will start with Spirit Airlines going concern concerns. Their second quarter earnings came out this week. And
bad.
Yeah.
That kind of just sums it up. No.
They're very not good.
Yeah, Spirit is still losing money hand over fist. It's very not good. They are losing money faster than they thought they would, which after bankruptcy and all of the things they have done, now including furloughing, or was it furloughing or laying off pilots? I'm not sure which it was.
So it was a furlough at the beginning of the year, and then it's an upcoming second furlough in addition to downgrading captains.
Yeah, that's it. So, yeah, things are bad. It says that if measures it's taking to increase liquidity, things they're doing like monetization of certain aircraft and real estate. Wait, I'm sorry. We'll get to that. But it says if things it's already doing to increase liquidity, which would be the increase of premium capacity on the airline by rearranging all sorts of fare brands over and over, the reinstation of some fees and things like that. But if the things they are currently doing to turn around the airline to make more money do not work, they're going to have to turn to some drastic measures to try to raise capital. Otherwise, there is substantial doubt, and that's a quote from them, substantial doubt that they will still be a going concern within 12 months.
Not good at all.
No. So what can they jettison to raise some money if that happens?
I mean, this is one of those situations where if you're having to discuss this,
it's not
if you're having to plan for this, it's already very not good. So the idea that Spirit has floated is basically sell what aircraft they can, as well as their airport usage, either slots or runway timings, and get money that way. But this is one of those things where all of those things are required to make money for the airline.
Yes, you need airplanes and gates and slots to be an airline. And if you sell those off to raise money to still be an airline, you won't be an airline anymore because you won't have the things you need to be an airline. So it's really a catch-22 here for Spirit. But Ned Russell put together a list of things that other airlines could potentially want, which would be 45 A320 family aircraft, 52 A320neo family firm orders. Now that's an interesting one because it doesn't impact Spirit today, but we know other airlines would hop on real quick to buy those slots off of Spirit if they wanted to. 10 preferential use gates at Fort Lauderdale, 6 preferential use gates at Detroit, and of course, here in New York, where everything matters more, LaGuardia slots and Newark runway timings, because those are the only airports that Spirit operates to where you actually need slots or runway timings, which are essentially slots. Those are extremely valuable, but if Spirit goes selling those off, it'll be really quite interesting because there is an entire terminal at LaGuardia that does nothing but serve Spirit flights. So, That could be interesting. Who out there could want just an entire terminal, LaGuardia, to play around with and have to themselves? I actually don't know the answer to that.
I can think of a couple airlines who might be tempted by that, but I'm not sure if anybody wants a terrible headache to deal with all of that. Certainly Spirit doesn't. And they say they're working on it. They feel like they've got a plan, but all signs are pointing to the plan just not working.
Yeah, Spirit doesn't offer enough premium capacity right now. And of course, we know things are not great here in the United States. So travel is down a little bit. And Spirit has just not caught up to the premium demand that other airlines have been able to capture. So their turnaround plan may not be enough, or it may not work fast enough to really matter, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I'm rooting for them. I do think the country needs a Spirit type airline, but I suspect Frontier would fill that void real quick.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if Spirit does end up not being around, what does in fact happen to the airline's assets. And if the rationale for keeping Spirit by itself on its own and not letting it merge with a variety of airlines, what does the government feel about the assets of that airline then going to certain other airlines?
I think it doesn't really matter because it kind of has to happen at that point.
Right. But how does that shake out? I guess that's my question. Hopefully I'm getting ahead of myself because Spirit can pull it out. But we're definitely going to keep following the story, and we'll see what the third quarter holds in store for Spirit Airlines.
Yeah, Frontier might end up being in a real sweet position after having almost massively overpaid for Spirit just a couple years later, getting to pick up the scraps at the dollar store.
Yeah. Jason, the next story that we're going to talk about, we've been wanting to talk about for 2 weeks now.
But we keep forgetting to put it in the thing.
Keep forgetting to put it in the show notes. So we finally did. On the 25th of July, the French BEA had a short announcement on their website that the Swiss Air Accident Investigation Board had begun an investigation into an incident that had occurred the previous November. So this is where this comes from, because what the French do is they publish notices whenever they are involved or whenever there is an incident that has occurred that they will be necessary to be involved in that is not in France. And they're usually very short, like, hey, we're party to this investigation. This is the basics of what happened. And that's really all we got. So then we looked at the data and oh boy.
Yeah. Huh. Well, our reaction was the same. That's good because wow, what happened?
An Aegean Airlines A320neo coming in from Athens to Geneva descended below the glide slope on its first approach. The lowest barometric altitude that the aircraft reached was a little less than 1,200 feet. So that's the standard pressure, uncorrected barometric pressure altitude.
Okay, but what was the actual altitude?
When correcting for local pressure and local elevation, the aircraft descended at about 3 miles from the runway, so over Lake Geneva, down to between 100 and 125 feet above the lake.
Miles away from the airport at 100 to 125 feet above the surface. And remind me, this was not at night, right? This was daylight with like not really significant weather, correct?
It was daylight. It was 10 a.m.
So firmly daytime.
Local time. Yeah, 10 a.m. local time. The weather was not perfect, but there were no storms. There was, however, a broken cloud layer at 600 feet.
Okay. So they were significantly below that. Really, really concerning for all sorts of reasons. First off, how would the aircraft have not been blaring out altitude alerts from the radar altimeter? How did air traffic control either not notice or take so long to notify the crew? Or if they did, why did it take so long for the crew to react, especially during daylight hours, to be that low, at that far away from the runway? It's kind of astounding to me that this kind of thing is still not just happens, but is possible to even happen. That with all the technology crammed into a modern aircraft like the 320neo, you can still almost have a controlled flight into terrain on a nearly perfectly daylight day. It doesn't make sense.
Thankfully, the flight ended without any injury or further incident. The aircraft circled for a second approach and landed safely the second time. The Swiss are investigating. Hopefully, we'll have a report that explains what happened here and answers all of the questions that Jason very clearly laid out. Because hopefully, it's not as simple as oops, and hopefully there's something to learn here, but we'll keep an eye on it to see if anything we can learn and if there are any safety enhancements that can be added here.
Yeah, it's good that at least somebody noticed and realized that this happened. If they didn't, of course, there wouldn't be an investigation. Probably not. So
not of this kind.
Right. It's good somebody noticed, but every time we read something like this, I'm just stunned that it's still possible for something like this to happen.
Yeah. And what's unclear from the announcement of the investigation is who took the initiative on the corrective action. We don't know if air traffic controllers noticed it and said, hey, what's the deal here? Or if pilots realized that they were still miles from the runway and said, maybe we should go around.
And they said, wait, we're not a seaplane today.
No, we are certainly not. And so hopefully the preliminary report at least will provide a bit of information about the sequence of events, if not, of course, the cause.
There, we finally talked about it.
We did it. This week, Brazilian investigators released their final report on what they've termed serious incident. I'm not the investigators, but I would say it's maybe bumped that up a level. This occurred in February when a Gol 737 MAX struck a ground vehicle in Rio de Janeiro and in action movie fashion topped the pickup truck. And we knew that this had happened, but with the report, we now know how it wasn't so much worse. Because thankfully, two things worked in everyone's favor here. One, the truck was parked on the runway longitudinally. So it was facing down the runway. Two, the pilots saw the truck with enough time not to completely avoid the collision, but to swerve enough so that they managed to fit the truck in between the nose landing gear and the left main landing gear.
Nailed it.
We'll put a link in the show notes to the final report, which includes a bunch of diagrams and photos. And just, if this was in a movie, you would go, come on. Really?
Come on, that's not real.
That's not going to happen.
The top of the yellow truck doesn't just come off like that. And dear listeners, it does.
It does. The report's also interesting for a number of other reasons, and that gets into the psychological aspects of the controllers and how the night was unfolding for the air traffic controllers. The truck was on the runway. The truck was supposed to be on the runway. It was there as part of runway maintenance. The controller locked their screen, which means that no aircraft can move on that runway. It's a visual representation saying there's something going on that runway that makes it unavailable for use. Then they walked away. And there was a lot of other things that were not necessarily not supposed to be happening in the control tower, like conversations and things like that, but that distracted that controller. And the controller then went back to their station, unlocked the screen, and cleared the aircraft for departure. Then, when realizing that there was still a truck on the runway, they tried to find the truck so that they could maybe get it off the runway somehow, instead of just telling the aircraft to stop the takeoff and cancel the departure clearance. Because at the point at which they realized something was wrong, the aircraft was only traveling at about 50 knots. So they could have easily rejected the takeoff, reset, and gone again.
Yep, 50 knots is no big deal.
So at multiple points, this was an easily preventable occurrence. And the report is worth a read in talking about how the tower is managed, how the sequence of events played out, and in what aspects things can improve. And certainly the air traffic controllers are working on that based on what the report mentions and the safety outcomes and learnings that they've included here. They also include the screen captures for what the screen looks like when it's locked and when it's active. And they're very different. I mean,
Yep,
this is good
there's
visual
a lot of
representation of,
red,
hey, this
red,
screen is
red.
locked.
Yeah, it's very red when it's locked. It's also real interesting in this report to see the amount or quality of the surveillance video they have inside the air traffic control cab, including 360-degree cameras that lets them look at pretty much anything in the cab at the time, which I think is
Yeah.
super cool. I don't know if that's common or if this is just really a high-tech kind of surveillance system they have in the cab there. It's a good use case to point out that, hey, when you have video recording of a situation and you're trying to piece together what exactly happened, turns out video is really helpful to figure that out. And I say that as we've talked in recent weeks about including video recording in flight decks and including that recording on the flight data recorders or whatever recorder on board aircraft, having it in the air traffic control tower seems to have helped the investigation quite a bit here. So we could actually see what was on screens at the time and what was happening and not just guessing what was happening and inferring from audio and clicks and things. We get to see what actually happened. And of course, privacy is maintained here. All the actual employees are not just blurred out, but completely blacked out. But the video is, or even the stills here, proved to be extremely helpful.
Yeah, because the video shows not only what's on the screens, but also what the controllers could actually see out the tower cab window. So I think that's helpful and also traces their physical locations. There's at one point where all three controllers in the tower are trying to find the maintenance vehicle looking out the windows instead of just saying, hey,
Stop. Everyone stop what you're doing.
Just don't move. Stop what you're doing and let's find that truck. So it's very interesting in a lot of respects. And I think Jason brings up a good point about the video being extremely helpful in the investigation.
Yep.
The Department of Transportation, Office of Inspector General here in the US, is beginning a investigation into the FAA's handling and organization of DCA airspace. That comes after the NTSB hearings a few weeks ago, in which there was a lot of conversation about the safe management of helicopter traffic in the DCA area, as well as the usage or lack thereof of ADSB out by military aircraft. To quote the DOT OIG, "We are initiating this audit to review FAA's oversight of existing safety gaps in the management of DCA's airspace, including the exemption process for ADSB out. Our audit objectives are to assess FAA's 1. Oversight and management of the airspace surrounding DCA, and 2. Policies and procedures to oversee ADSB out exemptions." Two sentences that basically say the exact same thing, but it will be very interesting to see how those two play into each other, specifically in DCA, and if the DOT OIG carries that further to say, okay, what about ADSB out exemptions nationally?
Yeah. Good. Audit everything. Take a close look at the everything. The FAA has been mismanaged for decades, so none of this is new. This will only prove useful if the DOT OIG is actually allowed to independently investigate and come up with recommendations that the FAA then in turn actually implements, which is kind of a long shot given the FAA's history of not doing the things that they're recommended by others to do. But it can't possibly hurt for the OIG here to investigate because it has become, as we've talked about many episodes in the past, so ridiculously abundantly clear with hindsight that this airspace around DCA was a ticking time bomb that did unfortunately go off. So we'll have to wait and see what the recommendations are, but it seems like the FAA has already taken the most blindingly obvious one of getting rid of that helicopter route that went right outside of DCA. So we'll see what else they have in store, though.
Yeah, we'll wait for the report and go from there. In a follow-up to a story that we talked about, well, a few months ago now, this week, a judge in Chile dropped the charges against Ethan Guo, who is the 19-year-old who is attempting to be the first or youngest person to fly solo to all 7 continents as a way to raise money for cancer charities. Initially, Chilean authorities accused the young pilot of flying there without permission. He says he had permission, and that remains to be seen because there's court filings, but that was not ruled upon. What happened is the judge agreed to drop the charges. In return, Guo will make a $30,000 donation to a children's cancer charity within 30 days to avoid a trial. He also needs to leave Chile as soon as possible, and he's prohibited from re-entering Chile for 3 years. Guo also must pay all of the costs for his flight down there, keeping the aircraft there, as well as maintaining the aircraft while he has been staying at a military facility on the Chilean base in Antarctica. He also needs to cover his own costs getting home.
Yeah, this all sounds quite pricey.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of money.
Yeah, a little weird to make someone that's on a mission to raise money to donate to charity for cancer research donate money already to another children's cancer foundation. I feel like that was the end result anyway. So, okay, good that he's not being prosecuted, I guess, because we know the intentions were good. But this whole thing is a little strange, isn't it?
It is very, very strange. So hopefully we'll be able to learn more about how everything went down when he has, in fact, left Chilean soil. Let's stay in South America and talk about ginger.
What?
You heard me.
Okay.
I didn't know this, and I have learned a lot this week about Brazilian ginger root. So
I had no idea ginger came from Brazil. Okay.
Well, apparently Brazilian ginger is very sought after. And American Airlines, in this year's ginger season, transported 900 tons of Brazilian ginger through Miami and Los Angeles.
Miami and L.A., huh? Not New York. Oh, you know what? That route's not a 777 anymore, so I guess they have less cargo capacity than they used to.
Yeah, so they used 787-8s and 777-200 ERs from Rio and Sao Paulo to Miami and Los Angeles, routing 900 tons of ginger throughout the U.S.
All the fun stuff comes through Miami from South America. The amount and the varied everything that comes in through air freight through Miami is just incredible. We should really have them on the podcast one day and just tell us about all of the weird things that come air freight through Miami that you never would have guessed. And it's not just flowers, but it's a lot of flowers.
It's a lot of flowers, and it's also a lot of ginger, apparently.
Who knew?
I did not. So thanks to American Airlines Cargo for sharing this fun fact. This is my who knew of the week.
Huh. I always thought ginger came from like Idaho or something. I don't know.
Maybe it does.
All right. Not something I thought was so exotic.
I mean, I don't know if I'd call it exotic. I mean,
Well, we're flying it in from Brazil. It's pretty exotic.
Got to fly it in from somewhere if you're not growing it here, right?
True.
Brazilian ginger is apparently prized for its robust aroma and high levels of gingerol, a bioactive compound responsible for its
that up. There's no such thing as gingerol.
I'm reading from the release. Quote,
ginger ale. There's no gingerol.
Often referred to as blue ginger, this variety boasts high levels of gingerol, prized for its anti-inflammatory and digestive health benefits.
I still don't believe you. Gingerol
it's more fibrous and nutrient dense than Chinese varieties of ginger, Jason.
Sure. It all ends up in a Schweppes.
This is now a ginger podcast.
So much to it that I had no idea. See what you can learn on this podcast?
There you go. We're educational, informative, and slightly off our rockers.
Just barely to all
Just
of that.
Barely. In this week's tariff news, Pilatus has stopped or will stop importing aircraft into the U.S. for now. Unfortunately for Pilatus, the US accounts for 40% of its annual purchases.
Ugh.
So that's a lot of aircraft as far as the small manufacturer is concerned. This is because of the recent 39% tariffs put on all Swiss goods coming into the US. So they're trying to figure out what to do. They already have a US manufacturing plant in the works, though it is not yet up and running. For its part, Pilatus says they will not be removing any personnel or anything like that. They're just going to wait this out for now and see what sticks.
All right.
Let's see. Canada, Jason? Shall we go to Canada?
We got some Canada news. That's good. Well,
We
not
have some
good
Canada news.
but some.
It's not good news, no.
No, but some of it hasn't actually happened yet.
Well, by the time the podcast comes out, it'll be much closer to happening, but
It will
we're
have
talking on
either
Wednesday,
happened
so-
or not happened.
or not happened. Yes. So we can do two versions of the story. Version A is the bad news version, in which Air Canada is preparing to lock out its flight attendants who have given notice to strike. So that's a 72-hour notice that will go into effect on Saturday at 1 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Air Canada, for its part, says it's participating in an orderly wind down of operations that will be carried out over 3 days. This will affect Air Canada mainline flights as well as Air Canada Rouge. I don't believe, based on what I've read from the airline and the union, it will affect regional flights operated on behalf of Air Canada by other airlines.
It does not. Air Canada Jazz or Express or whatever it's called these days will not be impacted, nor will flights operated by PAL on behalf of Air Canada be impacted, though I imagine those flights will be extremely busy. At least in cities here like in New York, we have a mix of Air Canada mainline and Jazz, so those remaining Jazz flights are going to be quite in demand. The few that actually manage to, depart when their aircraft aren't broken or severely delayed or canceled due to fleet shortages, but at least something will be moving. But those presumably will still be scheduled at least. But yeah, Air Canada is already winding down the orderly wind down. They say it's Canada, so you got to be very polite and very kind about it. It's an orderly wind down. But even if the strike does not actually go on, Air Canada still has to prepare for it and wind down the operations in advance of it. We saw this recently. I think it was last year with the pilots union was preparing for a strike, and it went down to the absolute wire, and Air Canada was already in the process of winding down the schedule for a strike that did not happen. So hopefully that's exactly what happens here with the flight attendants, that I at least hope they can come to a last minute agreement and get what they want, and Air Canada can continue operating, because it is mid to late summer and rebooking for a lot of people last minute is going to be very difficult, if not impossible.
So if the strike goes forward, that would impact about 130,000 passengers per day. So not an insignificant amount of people. Let's talk about what's at stake here between the flight attendants union and the airline. 10,000 Air Canada flight attendants represented by the union voted 99.7% in favor of a strike authorization at the beginning of August. The union is seeking wage increases as well as the ability to be paid for ground work that they do. So flight attendants at Air Canada are still paid only when the door is closed.
Which is the industry norm, I believe.
Right. And Air Canada flight attendants say, we want to be paid for when we are doing things for the airline on the ground. Things like safety checks, responding to emergencies on the ground, or aircraft evacuations. The airline says, okay, we will pay you 50% of what you get paid as your hourly rate for ground work. The pay increase that the flight attendants are seeking is much greater than the pay increase that the airline is willing to offer. And they also seem to be unable to agree on how much money they are actually making and how much money they would actually make, because of the various use of statistics and what they're including in the pay package and what they're not. So it doesn't sound like they're close to reaching an agreement.
No, not great. I've also seen, at least from the employee side, this is a bit strange, but Air Canada has also put a blackout in employee travel through August 22nd preemptively, which basically means that any employees who were traveling, I guess, non-rev or on Z fares or on Air Canada or other airlines, they are now locked out of employee travel, which is all sorts of strange because that doesn't really help the situation. If it's space available flying and you're worried about the strike, well, it doesn't really matter. Why would you prevent that? Because it's space available. So if there's space, why not let employees fly on that? So it seems like Air Canada is almost kind of fanning the flames a little bit, which is very strange to me. It seems like everyone is pissed off right now, but hopefully the strike doesn't happen. They can lift that blackout. Everyone can have what they want, and we don't have 110,000 passengers per day?
130,000.
130,000 passengers. Air Canada is a big airline, impacted every day. But this one's coming down to the wire yet again.
We shall keep a close eye on this and hopefully be able to report next week that both sides have reached an agreement. However, if they don't, it is still possible that they could be ordered to binding arbitration by the Canadian government, something that is not entirely off the table, though the Canadian Minister for Jobs and the Family has said that she is monitoring the situation and has urged both sides to the bargaining table, though we have not heard from the Prime Minister whether or not that he will order them into arbitration, which would block a strike. So we'll see how that goes and be back next week with an update either way.
All right.
Sticking with Canadian news, a Canadian court upheld an earlier court's ruling that Ukraine International Airlines faces unlimited liability in the shoot down of Flight 752 in Tehran a few years ago. Ukraine International Airlines had appealed the earlier ruling, saying, we did not act negligently, therefore, we should have our liability limited to what is basically a little more than $200,000 per passenger based on the Montreal Convention. This court said, no, we don't think that you have proven that you were not negligent. Therefore, your liability exposure remains unlimited. This does not decide right now how much the airline will need to pay to the families of the victims of that shoot down.
Wait, the burden
that will come separately.
Proof was on the airline to prove that they were not negligent. It wasn't on the plaintiffs to prove that the airline was negligent. That seems backwards.
So, yes.
Oh, okay. That is definitely not how it works typically here in the US.
So, a trial judge in Canada earlier ruled that the airline failed to prove on a balance of probabilities that it was not negligent, making their liability exposure unlimited. Now, a court of appeals for Ontario has said, yes, we agree with that. So the airline was saying Tehran at that point was not a conflict zone. It had discretion to permit that flight to depart, and other airlines were also departing. The court, for its part, said, well, there were missiles in the air, so that's kind of the definition of a war zone. And you don't know what safety plan or survey or program any of those other airlines had in place. So how could you know if they were making a good decision? So it's basically like a judge saying, well, if your friend jumped off a bridge, would you?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe.
Not helping, Jason.
No.
So this is an interesting one because it then moves on to a next phase of determining the amount of damages that the airline owes those families.
Yeah, taking a cap off it and basically saying it's unlimited, that raises all sorts of other questions on how do you define the monetary value passenger by passenger? That's a sticky one.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens and how quickly this, I mean, obviously, this has not been a fast moving process. The aircraft was shot down at the beginning of January 2020. So this is more than 5 years later. So I don't think this one will be over soon.
Yes, and Ukraine International Airlines, of course, has had a whole lot of other stuff going on in the meantime.
Yes, indeed. Let's head over to Dubai, where Emirates has announced that they are banning power bank usage beginning on the 1st of October and restricting their carriage on board aircraft to anything less than 100 watt hours. So you'll be able to carry your external battery bank onto the aircraft. You already can't bring it in checked baggage, but you'll be able to carry it onto the aircraft. It has to be less than 100 watt hours total charge capacity, and you cannot put it in the overhead bin. It must either remain in the bag under your seat or in the seat back pocket for the entire flight, and you can't use it to charge anything while you're on board.
Yeah, Emirates is one of the few airlines in the world that can get away with this because it has power outlets, I believe, at every seat on every plane. So you shouldn't really need to use a power bank. But this is definitely not the only country or the only airline looking to do this. And that 100 watt hour, I believe, vaguely mirrors what we have here with the FAA in the US, at least for the internal batteries of equipment. I believe the maximum allowable lithium-ion battery you can have in a device is no bigger or cannot be 100 watt hours or larger. So that's why many laptops, including a lot of Apple laptops, have a 99 watt hour battery, just up to that limit of what you can bring on an aircraft, but not touching it. So that's no coincidence. So what Emirates is doing is not just for internal batteries, but also external power banks. But that's 100 watt hours to be a massive battery bank, if that's what they're putting in a MacBook Pro.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when I saw this from Emirates, I was okay. What size battery do I? It's not an insignificant battery.
Yeah, I have my typical one that I travel with right here in my hand, and you know what? I don't actually know. I just know it's I don't know is the answer. This stuff is complicated.
It's about 37 watt hours.
There you go. Thank you. I know China's been very particular about power banks for a very long time, for at least a decade, that if your device doesn't have these specifications like the watt hours and all that printed on it, they
I should mention that that'll also be part of the requirements beginning October 1st.
Well, there you go.
You'll need to prove your battery is what you say it is.
Yes, and hopefully that will be printed on it accurately, and it is what it is, because we know a lot of these battery banks you might purchase off less than scrupulous sites like Temu or whatever. A lot of those devices they're complete fabrications, and they are not what they claim to be. You know, kind of like those USB flash drives that claim to be 5 terabytes when they're really just like a 512 megabyte SD card with a lot of this stuff is not trustworthy. A power bank is not something I would recommend buying on less than from a dealer that you would not really recommend buying anything else from, because lithium-ion batteries they're little bombs, basically. So spend the extra few dollars on a name brand.
There you go. Jason, do you want to try and pronounce the volcano's name, or should I give it a shot?
I don't. You always take the tricky to pronounce things. So have at it.
Let's see if I'm right. And if I'm not right, anyone listening, please email us podcast@fr24.com and help us out. So right now we're talking about the Klushevskoy volcano, I think. And as of right now, we're also going to need to start talking about the Krashenenikov volcano, because that's also erupting right now.
Right in the region where there was that, 8.8 magnitude earthquake?
Yeah.
Woke up some very dormant for centuries volcanoes, and they are right where you want to slot all those trans-Pacific flights.
So at the moment, we've got 2 volcanic eruptions coming off the Kamchatka Peninsula, and that has been playing havoc with trans-Pacific flights. There have been some very interesting routings over the past few days, because in the before 2022 times, traffic would have just shifted slightly north and flown around the other side of the volcanic eruption between North America and Asia. You can't do that anymore because most of the traffic crossing the Pacific Ocean can't use Russian airspace. So a lot of those flights had to fly due south from Anchorage, and make a big right turn over the middle of the Pacific and then head on to places like China, Japan, Korea. Or they had to stop for fuel and then continue on.
Yes.
So that was not fun. And based on the current ash clouds, might not be fun again.
Yeah. Interesting to watch which flights did divert and did not divert. There was a lot of, obviously, right after it happened, airlines had to scramble and do what they needed to do. But there are a lot of flights between New York and Tokyo. I think like 8 a day. And when things finally stabilized, there was only one flight a day that still had to divert. And that was United's flight from, I believe, Haneda to Newark, because it was the only one using an elderly 777-200. Everything else is on a 787, 777-300ER, or an A350. And that poor little 777-200 just didn't have the legs to go all the way to Newark. So it finally, just yesterday, started making that flight nonstop again. I guess the winds were favorable.
Uh-oh.
And today it had to divert to Cleveland because of weather in Newark. So United just can't win.
Oh, man.
It's okay. The other flight diverted to Boston, so they got some of that too.
Oof.
They just can't win.
They just cannot win. Speaking of win, Awesome Cargo is currently the only airline transiting between the two ash clouds. So that's an interesting place for them to be. Awesome Cargo, which is a new-ish Mexican cargo airline operating with A330 passenger freighter aircraft. So their call sign is WIN.
They are threading the needle.
Very, very slightly, yes. Let's continue with our conversation about the weather and talk about typhoons. It is typhoon season, and that means it's Taiwan's turn to get hit by wind and a whole lot of rain. And that made for some very interesting flights coming into Taipei today, which was not directly impacted by the typhoon just yet. However, the wind coming off of Typhoon Podol made for some dicey landings, and one in particular.
Yeah, one in particular would be a UPS 747-8F. I don't think it was coming from... Was it coming all the way from Anchorage? I don't think it was. I think it was coming from China, maybe? Not completely sure. Doesn't matter. It was coming from somewhere. It's a 747. It's really big. But looks like it happens is they were
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, thank you. It looks like when they were just about to touch down, they were hit with a bit of a nasty gust, and they yawed quite a bit to the left, and it looks like then they overcompensated a bit to the right, and there was a pretty dramatic-looking engine pod strike captured on a live stream at the airport in Taiwan, and a lot of sparks, a lot of big, scary visuals, but then the aircraft kind of just taxied to its ramp position, no problem, and there are some pictures of the engine missing its cowling now. I don't know if the cowling came off during landing or if it was removed for inspection, but that airplane's probably going to be in Taipei for a while.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how long it needs to stay there and how much repair needs to be done, whether there was just cowling damage and they can, get it.
Slap a new one on and get it out
quickly, or maybe they can borrow one from someone. But if they need a whole engine, there's further proof that the 777-300ERSF is up to the task, because IAI had successfully loaded, not this engine powers the 747-8, I'm just trying to transition here. They loaded a Rolls-Royce Trent 1000 into the new 777 freighter. So that was cool.
Yeah, so you need a 777-300ER to deliver an engine to little baby bro 787. That's nice.
Yeah. So we'll keep an eye out for that one as airframers continually try and say, hey, we can carry big stuff with our planes too.
Nice.
In good news, or rather news that needed to happen or bad things would, the UK Competition Authority has approved Boeing's acquisition of Spirit Aerosystems, or the work of Spirit Aerosystems that Boeing was trying to acquire in the UK. So that's very good news to move things forward.
What's next?
Oh, boy. So this, while it makes sense, is kind of a bummer. Well, in general, but Jason seems excited because it gives New York the top spot again.
We love Crown.
Alaska is cutting Hawaiian Airlines Honolulu-Boston flight, which is currently the longest U.S. domestic route at 4,427 nautical miles.
Puts us back on top at 4,330 nautical miles, as it should be.
So as part of this discussion, Jason and I were trying to figure out what the longest domestic flight in the U.S. could be. Not what it is, but what it could be. And it turns out
you would think.
It's not what you would think.
And it's never going to happen.
Well, that's the other thing about it. But at 8,170 nautical miles, you could fly from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Guam.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That sounds like some Steve Giordano nonsense. That maybe.
In a 737-200 making 27 stops.
It's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, probably is out of the realm of possibility, but if anyone can do it and should take us along for the ride, it's Steve.
It's Steve. We'll ask him if he's ever managed.
If you have another suggestion for what could potentially be the world's longest domestic, probably but never actually going to happen flight, let us know.
What can you come up with? Well, Jason, when there's an upgauge in aircraft, it's usually cause for celebration.
Yeah.
In this particular aspect, it is cause for celebration, but this seems to go a bit overboard.
Let me toss you some words, and you can guess what aircraft we're moving from and what aircraft we're moving to. And as a hint, we've talked about this before in episode 279, but the words used by this airline are big news, upgrading the journey, sleek, spacious, quieter, more comfortable, modern interiors, larger windows, more personal space, enhanced operational reliability and performance, premium experience, and, to close it out, a whole new altitude. See, they were riffing off attitude, but they used altitude there. That is a lot of ways to describe Delta moving from a CRJ 700 to an Embraer E175 in Aspen. Woo! Never before has there been so much hype about upgauging to an E175. And we talked about why that's a big deal for Aspen. You can go back to episode 279 for that. But that's a lot of ways to describe an airplane that I fly down to Dulles on and don't even get a cup of water.
One day, Jason, you'll get that cup of water.
I'll get that cup of water. And it will be big news with an upgraded journey on a sleek, spacious, quiet, comfortable, modern, large window, personal space, operationally efficient aircraft.
All right, then. How about a beer, though? Could you get a beer?
I would love a beer. And I discovered today, I'm a couple months late, and I'm really honestly disappointed in all of you for not pointing this out to me. But my second favorite airline animal mascot airline, being Cayman Airways and Sir Turtle, they launched a custom beer. And it's available on international jet flights, which I guess was,
I love that they say that.
Most of their flights, I believe, right?
I love that the beer is available on their international jet flights.
Yes, but it's special because I believe we've talked about this before. I've personally talked about it before. Airlines that have their own custom beer brewed specifically for the airline. In this case, I think it might be my favorite ever because it's Sir Turtle's Sky Brew. And Sir Turtle, if you're not familiar with the mascot, is all over this can. It is what it says it is, Sir Turtle Sky Brew. It is an IPA, I believe, brewed in the Cayman Islands. And you note, Ian, it is only $6.
You get one for free, and then you can buy more for $6.
That's a damn good deal. And now I want to go to the Cayman Islands and have Sir Turtle's Sky Brew.
Sky Brew. I like it.
Once upon a time, I put together an entire round-the-world itinerary using only airlines that have their own specific brewed beer for the airline. It's surprisingly easy, actually.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, there are worse reasons to fly around the world, I think.
Yeah. Now you have to make a stop in Grand Cayman. Could be worse.
Would any of those flights hit one of your favorite or least favorite airports of all time?
Well, I mean, if I were going to the Cayman Islands, it'd probably be JFK to Grand Cayman. So, no, neither end is my favorite or least favorite airport. But if you were on the social medias today, you probably saw the debate about, hey, what's the worst airport in the world. And then others countered it by saying, that's too negative. What's your favorite airport? That's less fun because there are so many good airports. But least favorite airport, Ian, what do you got at the top of the list?
As far as my least favorite airport?
Worst airport in the world from your opinion.
This is tricky because there are so many good ones, and then there's very specific things that make bad airports bad. And I have to say that Frankfurt Airport is just bad.
That's the easy one. Yeah, that gets a lot of votes.
What bothers me about Frankfurt Airport is it was designed without either passengers or airplanes in mind.
Well, that's a problem. So it serves nobody well.
No, there are a lot of airports that are bad for passengers and good for airplanes. And there are a lot of airports that are vice versa. And Frankfurt is just bad at both.
Yeah, it is dreadful. I personally put LAX currently at the top of the list. It's dreadful. It's a huge pain to get into or out of. But that's where things potentially get better at the beginning of next year when the APM opens finally. I think that will take LAX off the top of the podium. It'll still be a firm number 2, but I think that will take it down from my personal designation as worst airport in the world.
This is a good time to remind everyone that in a month's time, literally a month's time from today, September 13th, Jason and I will be with so many of our good AvGeek friends experiencing the worst airport in the world with Brett over at Cranky Flyer and all of the good people at NYC Aviation for Dorkfest and Spot LAX. As far as I know, the list for the tour airside participation at the Flight Path Museum is closed. The list is closed. We've reached capacity. However, there is a wait list, so put your name on it because there are always no-shows, and hopefully they can work something out to increase that capacity and get you over there. If nothing else, we will see you at 11 a.m. across the street from the In-N-Out at the park, where we will eat burgers and watch planes. Mm-hmm. All right, we close the show with some reader mail because, Jason, we were incorrect in our discussion about scope clause. One slight correction that an eager United pilot points out. We said that United can only operate a certain number of regional jets of a certain size. And he pointed out that no, that's incorrect. The regional airlines can only operate a certain number. If United wanted to operate 1 million E-175s with mainline pilots, and he points out, he goes, I miss the Embraer. And so my hope is that United ends up with the E-195 E2 as a mainline aircraft. It'll never happen.
Never happen. That's
wouldn't that be lovely?
United itself or Delta itself or American itself is not operating these aircraft. The regional carriers are operating them on behalf of the mainline airline. But yes, the E-195 E2, never going to happen. The closest we're ever going to get to anything like this is the A220-100 operating as a mainline aircraft for Delta. And even that's like, really? I can't believe they actually did that. But it's just the E2 is at this rate, unless the scope clause changes, we will never see it in operation for mainline or regional operation at a U.S. airline, unfortunately. The E1 will remain the cockroach of the skies in the U.S. for the foreseeable future.
And beyond that.
Yes.
All right. Let's call this an episode. We'll call it episode 332. Mm-hmm. And I will say thank you so very much for listening. If you have enjoyed this episode, any of the other episodes, or if you have comments, questions, or criticisms, email us at podcast@fr24.com. Or in the show notes, you can leave a comment if you go to the Flight Radar 24 blog page. So thank you all so very much for listening. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.